Kia ora koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou mō te haere mai ki tēnei rā. Ko waiau, ko Morwenna tōku ingoa, no Ingarangi o Kutupuna, I tupu aki au I Bristol, I haere mai mātou ki Aotearoa I te tau 2015. Ko kaukau te moanga e tāre ni tōku nākau, ko te whanganui e tāra te moana e hāpai ni tōku wairua. Ko Edwin tāku tāne, ko Leo rārua, ko Althea aku māhanga. Ko Morwenna tōku ingoa. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora all, thank you so much for coming today. I like the idea that dealing with the media seems terrifying, whereas this is absolutely terrifying. It's the worst of both worlds, because I'm not only being filmed, but I've got all of you to look at, which will be either great or, if you're smiling and happy and engaging, and I have brought some chocolate to, try and get things going, and I will be throwing out opportunities for you to feedback and for questions and to get your thoughts as well throughout the presentation. So yeah, this came about. So I'm the chair of the PR Institute of New Zealand Central Committee here in Wellington, and one of our committee members was like, you should go and have coffee with Gail and find out what they're up to at the Comms Collective. So I merrily got in touch with Gail, we had a coffee, and half an hour later I was signed up for this workshop thinking, it'll be fine, it'll be like 10 people or something, and then talked to Ali, and then she's like, oh no, we've got 50 people. I was like, okay. So yeah, here I am. So a lesson learned, going for coffee with Gail, be prepared for what you will sign up for.
I second that.
Yeah. But it is a real pleasure to be here today, and I hope that you get something out of it. I will be asking you in a moment what you are seeking to get out of it, so that I can at least try and offer you some stuff that will be of value to you. But a little bit about me. Yep, as Ali talked about, so 10 years as a journalist. I'm obviously from the UK, so I worked for the BBC, working in regional and local television, and then I worked for Sky News, based in London, doing national and international news. Spent some brief time here in New Zealand, working at TVNZ up in Tāmaki Makaurau. Loved it in Aotearoa, but everybody we met in our sort of mid-20s was desperate to go and live in London. So we thought, maybe we should go and do this London thing that all these Kiwis want to do, because we'd never lived in London. So we went back, and that's when I worked for Sky. And then I thought, actually, if I want to have an actual life and, buy a house and get married and have children, I should probably stop working night shifts. And so I moved into public relations. And my first role was with the University of Manchester, trying to turn life sciences into things that made sense to everybody else, which was not as challenging as it seems in hindsight, now working in government, trying to turn public bureaucracy and legislation into things that people understand and are interested in is more challenging than cell biology. I loved that role, and that really allowed me to then look at coming back to Aotearoa. So my husband and I always said when we had children we would return here, and at the time it didn't feel particularly lucky, but in hindsight we were very lucky to have twins. So it's my mahanga, my Leo and Althea, and that really meant that we could come and have a look at coming back here. So yeah, we came in 2015. It was a role at the Ministry of Education that allowed us to emigrate here, and that was a really interesting introduction into life in Aotearoa and working in government for the first time as well. I then moved to working for the Minister of Education, so it's Heke Parata at that time, and then Nikki Kay, and that was a whirlwind experience, just amazing to walk into Parliament every day and be like, wow, I work here, after barely a year in the country. But that was a really awesome experience. And since then I've worked at different government agencies, and I'm currently at Arapatama Aotearoa, so Department of Corrections, working in the reintegration and housing space. So a bit more kind of community relations rather than media these days. But, I like to keep a hand in. So, as I mentioned, spare time, chair of the PRIN Central Committee. And through PRINS, they have the Accreditation in Public Relations, which I did in 2018, which is an awesome qualification. If anybody does work in comms and you've been doing it for 5 years, highly recommend doing the APR. What else do I do? I'm in my third year of learning te reo Māori, so this afternoon I'm heading off to my first noho marae. So this has been just a crazy, crazy week, but it's good. And just try and keep the children alive. So interested to hear what you guys want to get out of today. And I'm going to cheat because I know someone right at the back over there. So Paula.
I guess I don't do a lot of media relations in my role, so but it's definitely something that I do need to do. So it's kind of what's the best way to how do you know if you've got a good story? First of all, is something because it seems really cool to you. So how do you make sure it's going to be cool to the media and they'll take it up? And should you kind of how do you create those relationships with the media?
Cool. I didn't actually prep Paula. That was an amazing answer on the spot there. Anybody else? Yeah?
Yeah, I think there's a perception that journalists are terrible and want to kind of rip you to shreds because that's what we kind of see on the 6 o'clock news with intense media figures. But the way that people can engage with journalists to help them to gain information about your subject matter to basically achieve the same goal. And how to get in contact with people and saying we've got information we want to share and not being frightened of that interaction. And I think it's fear of saying something wrong or being misquoted or all of those things that prevent people from taking that step to make progress and get more messages out there.
Yeah, that's understandable. Yeah. Yeah?
How to find the right people to contact, because it's changed so much since previous years where you used to just phone up your local journalist and invite them to come down and do a little media release. Now it's all online, so who do you actually talk to?
That's a good question. Okay, well, those are some good points to pick up on, and I will try and answer those as we go. Feel free to ask questions as we go as well, and we've got an exercise to squeeze in as well that Ali has very kindly offered to run, so I don't need to explain it to you all, because to be honest, that was the bit I was least looking forward to. Okay, so what is media? And this is where the bribery comes in. So there's chocolates for answers. So thinking about what is a media channel? What is a media outlet? Like, where do you go to get your news from?
Social media?
Yep, that's a good answer. Orange or creamy milk? Because I brought orange, I was like, that's because I like it. But then I was like, well, not everyone might like it. Okay, so we've got...
So these are the traditional kind of print media stuff and NZ Herald and things like that we're kind of familiar with, but that's one subset, isn't it?
Yep. So we've got the print media, and of that, many of them have online now as well. Any other channels that you tend to watch or get your news from? TV, yep. TV news, still thriving. Al Jazeera, yeah. TV news, international news, yep. Yeah. It's been fascinating, the revival that podcasts have had. They were really big about 10 years ago, and then they seemed to kind of die away, and now they've just come back with a vengeance. And they are somewhere that people are really getting their news from now, I think, and listening and learning a bit deeper about different subjects. So that's a good range of ones. So what did I have? My first love, radio. Print media, TV. So that's from when I worked at the Law Society. That was from an interview that the president of the Law Society did with One News just outside the court. Magazines, they are still going. Got the social media aspect, podcasts, thinking about Māori, Pacifica media, also the many different ethnic media outlets that there are across New Zealand, especially in Tāmaki Makaurau. And thinking about specialist publications, so industry-specific publications. And it was my pleasure to edit Law Talk for a year and a half, which was a challenge. So any ideas that people have for industry magazines will be gratefully received by those who produce them. And they do actually have a surprisingly wide audience at times. So it can be worth tapping into, thinking about if there is an industry magazine or channel that will be interested in your content and the audience will reach you. So another round of chocolate options. So I found this really interesting in terms of the channels that people are consuming their news from. And this is from Trusted News in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So this was research done in 2022 by the AUT Research Centre for Journalism, Media and Democracy. So they asked New Zealanders about their sources of news in the past week. So any thoughts on which outlet you think was maybe the first one?
I think Facebook.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, people are getting, not the right place to get their news, but people getting their news.
Yeah. The Facebook is in, the social media is in there, but it's not the top. Yeah.
Is it stuff?
Almost. Actually, it is tied. It's tied. Stuff and one other. Which one? Radio New Zealand is in there. Again, not the top. It was depressingly low from my perspective because I love Radio New Zealand. Sorry? No, not there. Sorry? Spin-off? No. There are other online news sites that are in there. I'll put you out of your miseries. It's TVNZ, actually, and then stuff was tied with TVNZ, which I thought was interesting because I very rarely watch TV news anymore.
Is that TVNZ, does that include the online TVNZ or is that live TV?
That's a good question. My interpretation was that it was the live TV, by the way that they phrased the report. Yeah. Yeah, so still very popular. And then News Hub was the third one. The NZ Herald, up there with News Hub, social media. Yeah, so not a huge difference, 20%. But yeah, a real go-to place for people for their news. Radio New Zealand. Do you have a question?
Do you have any data about like the age ranges, like what platforms have age ranges?
Yeah, so I will put the link into the. I'll send Ali the link to this report because it's freely available and it makes really interesting reading actually about how people are consuming their news. And yeah, so that I can't remember off the top of my head whether they had broken it down by age. But it's a report worth looking at.
I actually thought TV and I thought, no, I'm too old, it can't still be number one.
I know, I thought that too, yeah.
That's why
Sure.
that's why I wondered how much of it was on the actual on-demand of TV and of the news as well. Like,
Yeah.
Did the one news website's quite, so.
yeah.
Yeah, so those last ones, so that's print media at 19% and other online sources, alternative news sites at 13%. And the online news sites was 31%. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. There was a pretty good stat around the interest in media, because again, it can be easy to think that people aren't that interested anymore. This study found that approximately 75% of New Zealanders are interested or extremely interested in the news. 7% were not interested, and including 2% who were not interested at all. So that gave me quite a lot of heart that there's life in media yet, no matter what the commentary says.
Multi-choice, that doesn't add to 100. This is a multi-choice that people could select more than one.
Yeah, it was just an option, where have you consumed news in the last week? So for me personally, that would be Radio New Zealand, Stuff, NZ Herald, like multiple options. So, yeah. And when it comes to trust, any thoughts on what the most trusted news brand out of those would be? It is RNZ, yes. Yeah, which did make me happy. Yes, that was consumed. And the Otago Daily Times, which was included for the first time in the survey, was actually the second most trusted news brand, followed by TVNZ and News Hub. So what is news? What is news? What generally makes the news?
Disasters.
Yes, disasters, yep. Stuart Nash, politics. Yes, there can be chocolates for this. So yeah, politics, disasters. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
Feel-good stories.
Yeah, feel-good stories, cute fluffies. Yep. Yeah, that's a good point. Sport, yep. That does tend to make the news. crime, yes, yep, that is definitely one.
Sadly, celebrity news too.
Yes, that is also in there, yep. So politics, disasters, crime. We had crime over there. They deserve chocolate. Celebrities. I wasn't sure if celebrities and royals were the same category or not, but, you know, we'll lump them all in together. Yeah, the slightly odd, cute, fluffy stories, the quirky things, and people's personal stories. And I think this is where, certainly in the not-for-profit, if you're advocating for something, or if you're working with people who've got stories of the experiences they've had, and they are willing to talk about those experiences, more and more it's that personal connection, it's that personal story that makes a news article. It's about bringing something that can be quite esoteric to life through somebody talking about their own experience. So case studies and people's personal stories. But yeah, the cute fluffies is interesting, and really what drives news from a journalist perspective is, you know, it's kind of what are people talking about? What are they going to be interested about? So a really good example was when I was quite new into radio, is we had a huge debate about what should lead the midday bulletin. Should it be a really important political story that was quite dry, but, you know, kind of an important thing? Or was it the fact that an absolute underdog horse had taken out the Grand National, which is, you know, a huge race in the UK? You know, we agonised over this. And do you know what led in the end? It was the horse. Yep. Because the horse was what everyone was going to be talking about down the pub or round the water cooler. And so really it was like, what are people going to be talking about? What are they going to be interested in? And, you know, I think news is especially with the advent of online news, where news channels, journalists can see what people are clicking through. That's really changed the news agenda. You know, it's less of the kind of, this is important and you should know this. It's the, ooh, you know, everyone wants to know about this celebrity gossip. You know, this is getting the biggest hits and the clicks. And that's, you know, the journalists are responding to what we're telling them we're interested in through what we're consuming, because they can see that. And I think there's opportunity in that. I really do. I think the personal stories is a huge area of opportunity to really tap into to get news coverage. So why would you engage with the media? And this is a really, really important question that you need to think about first and foremost before you do anything, is why do you want to do it? Because if it's to reach a certain audience, is the media the best way to do that? Are you wanting to raise awareness? Then yes, it probably is. But are you wanting people to take a specific action? You may not achieve that through getting media coverage. So really understanding the why you want to get media coverage will then drive almost every other aspect of your choice about how you go about then engaging with the media. So thinking about an example, if there's a specific audience you want to reach and a media outlet that will help you is, you know, if you're advocating for a law change, then you're going to want to get into the ears of ministers or senior public servants. So you're probably going to go to Radio New Zealand, because that's where, you know, the Wellington bubble consume their news. But if you want something else, then you probably choose a different channel. So thinking about who your audience is that ultimately you're trying to reach, because you're not, the audience is not the journalist at the end of the day. It is in the immediate term, but the actual audience you want is the consumer of the news. So who is that? And thinking about that end user is the most important thing that will then drive which avenue you go through for your news and how you want to present and deliver that story. I also think a really, really important part of getting media coverage is, what are you going to do with the media coverage when you get it? Is it part of a wider campaign? How are you going to capitalise on it? Because if you get media coverage, it can be a really nice surprise that you've got it. You know, one of the first media releases I did at the University of Manchester was a front page story on the Daily Express. I wasn't in work that day and suddenly got all these messages going, my God, your story's on the front page of the paper, and, you know, a national newspaper. And I was like, wow, that's really surprising. So whilst you go with the intention of wanting to get media coverage, it is always a nice surprise when you actually get it. And then you need to think about, well, how are we going to use this? You know, what are we going to do with it? How are we going to use it on our social channels? Are we going to send it to different people? You know, kind of really thinking about how you then build on it, so you're not just doing that media coverage for the sake of it. Thinking about when to engage with the media, and this really will be driven by your why. You know, what are you seeking to achieve? So when is the best time for you to do that? You know, if you are seeking a specific outcome, is there a time frame for that outcome? I put on here proactive versus reactive, and this is a really good space. So a lot of the time we tend to think in the PR world about proactive. So how do I get my media release covered by a news outlet? And that's what would be typically known as proactive. Reactive is, you know, a story is happening, a journalist rings you up, wants some commentary. And there is opportunity in any space if you have good spokespeople, if you've got people who are available, who are confident, who are happy to talk to journalists, then there is a way to build up their profile, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. And you can capitalise on when there is something in the media that is connected to your work, your perspectives, your area of specialism. And once you've got into a journalist's address book or a media channel's address book, you will be there for life, and you will get rung up again and again, especially if it comes to radio, because trying to put together a breakfast programme every single day is very challenging, and getting the right people on air and getting people to agree to talk to you at 6 a.m. And TV is, even harder, trying to get people to talk to you at 6 a.m. live on TV with or without makeup. So you know, thinking about that, that you know, where can you offer? Because you've got something to offer. If you've got a good spokesperson who's got something interesting to say that will fill 3 minutes of airtime or will give an interesting perspective in a news story that's written, then journalists will really appreciate that, and they will seek you out once they know about you as well. They'll come back. Yeah.
On that, if you, so for example, in our organisation, we're trying to get our CEO as a thought leader kind of recognised. So often our sector is in the news. So are you suggesting that you would, if something came up that you were sort of involved in and you wanted to put them as a thought leader, that you would ring a media contact that you might have, and would you then say, we're happy to speak on that?
Yeah.
And then what do you need to do then to prepare your person? Because obviously you don't want to volunteer them, and they, you know, cause
Yes, never do that. Never volunteer someone and then they're not available.
They're in the spotlight, and they, you know, and you kind of encourage them. This is going to be great. Or, you know, put you there. How much preparation, or are you hoping that your spokesperson is so well prepared that they can then kind of answer those questions and speak?
Yeah, so I suppose ideally it's a topic that they're well versed on. So it's something that is relevant to you, and so it's something that they could talk on. If they were at a barbecue and somebody started asking them about that, they would happily be able to reel off a number of things. And I think it comes back a little bit to your question about, you know, journalists, when we see them on radio and television, or we see them at a press conference with the Prime Minister, they seem quite very short, quite rude at times, not giving people a chance. You know, if you listen to Kim Hill when she's getting into something on radio, you can end up feeling quite sorry for people. I think for you in your space, journalists are not there to rip you to shreds. You're there to help them, and they're there to help you. So you are providing them with a story, or you're providing them with a perspective, you're providing them with someone to fill 3 or 4 minutes of airtime, you're providing them with someone to give an interesting quote or perspective to round out a story that they're having to file in a very short space of time. So there's a sense that they owe you a little bit. And so I would be extremely surprised if any journalist in the situations that you're working in, unless you're here from a minister's office, which I doubt you are, that your spokesperson would be treated negatively. It's always a risk, but if that was the case, you would have absolute right to speak to the editor and to make a complaint, because if you approach a journalist in good faith, you've had a good conversation, you understand what the story is about, they understand what the contribution is that you'll be offering, then they're not there to rip you to shreds at the end of the day.
You can always talk to the journalist and say, could you give me some idea of the questions you might be asking? You can, go to that level of preparation, and also think about the different media. If it's live radio or TV, that's quite different from a print journalist, but it's going to be going into a lot more detail, potentially sending through written questions to be answered in a greater period of time. So there's lots of different ways of looking at it.
So you can kind of ask for that a little bit. You're not sort of
particularly in that situation. I mean, as you say, it's quite different if it's a more hostile interview. But in that, when you're providing information, say, well, this is a specialist area, so he wouldn't want to go into that space. But this is, by all means, build that relationship. And that's as a comms person, that can be your role.
Do you have to provide the journalist that opening position with a media release, or is it just
an email
No.
or a call?
Can be an email call, and there are things you can do to build your person's profile. So opinion pieces, the Stuff and Herald always need opinion pieces. They have editors whose main job it is to gather opinion pieces. If you look on the Stuff website, there's at least 3 a day op-eds. They are generally about 800 words. You can pen one and then offer to send and then send it. Generally, it's good to ring up the op-ed editor and say, we're thinking about doing this. And particularly if you can tie that to either a topical news story or an event coming up, like there's a particular week that ties in with your organisation's, goals and what you kind of stand for, then that can be a really good way to build profile. LinkedIn, Twitter, journalists are all over those channels. We saw what happened to Rob Campbell when he posted on LinkedIn his views on public sector and government. So journalists are there, they're looking, get your person to start building their social profile if they don't already have one, particularly on those 2 channels, if you're wanting to get in the eye of journalists. The other thing is, in terms of approaching, it is challenging because journalists are very busy. It is a difficult work environment these days. The news never stops. It's often a 24-hour cycle. There's huge pressure to get things done in a very, very timely manner, particularly in the online space. So if you are, journalists sadly don't have time to really sort of come and have a chat or have a cup of tea. If you have something to offer, they will make time for you, but there needs to be something that they can take away that can be a story. And in terms of how you approach them, we'll come on to that in a little bit, pretty much about now. So how to engage. So this is just a quick overview of what we're going to be looking at. So sort of some of the key questions to really think about for you when you're seeking to talk to journalists. So being really clear on what the topic is, and we've just talked about that kind of reactive aspect, is it something that's topical and already in the news? You need to be able to provide them something that's really easy to understand, really quick and digestible. You need to be able to ideally provide them with content. So content is key. Content is what makes the world of media go round. And by content, I mean whether it's a written word, whether it's a video, whether it's photos, whether it's a person to talk to about their personal story or an expert to talk to about their view on something. Content is key. So you need to think about what is the content that you have to offer, and then is there a way that you can build in how you offer that story so that you've got some great photos, or you've got a video, or you've got the person lined up for the journalist to talk to. So really thinking about what you have to offer when it comes to content. And there can be, journos love surveys. I don't know why. It's the easiest story hit in the world, but journos love surveys. They don't even have to be that robust anymore. Just, makes a great headline. So-and-so percentage says or found this. And Ali had, when we were talking about this presentation, made a really good point about that longer form journalism. So, magazines, can you offer to write something for a magazine, whether that's an industry one or North and South, the listener, if you've got someone who can write something or you write it yourselves, you're then giving them quality content that will fill, say, a page or two, and then they don't really have to do anything. You know, ideally you want your byline on it, and you want, you know, to be clear that it's come from your organisation, but that can be a really good opportunity. Again, it's about reaching out to say, thinking about doing this, would it be of value? So you don't want to put a lot of work in and it not go anywhere. But that's sort of worth thinking about. Again, doing a bit of a trawl through magazines, through what spaces there are, and online where you could maybe offer to do that. So thinking about what's relevant, what's going to reach the audience that you're ultimately wanting to communicate with. So the who, thinking about who the story is about, and that will really, I guess, drive the kind of outlet that you choose. So if the story is about people in a certain location, you're probably going to be looking at a local media outlet. If it's about a certain section or a certain industry, you might want to look at that industry specific thing. If it's something that affects everybody, then you've got potentially a national story on your hands. And so thinking about that, who your story is about, and whilst your story might be a general story about what you stand for or what you're doing, if you can find a face, you can find a person, again, it comes back to that case study, that person who embodies what you're all about, then that is really going to engage better with journalists. They love media is storytelling. So if you've got someone who's got a good story to tell, then that will be key to getting your coverage. Sadly, journalists don't like to interview comms people. I think it's, you know, jealousy over the how much you get paid and not having to do overnight shifts. But, you know, you need to think about, if you are going to offer, then who have you got to talk? Because they probably won't want to talk to you if your role is a comms person. Sad but true. And yeah, thinking about that target outlet in terms of who you're actually going to get to ultimately at the end of the day, who's your key audience. And we've talked about the range of media. There's a huge media landscape out there, and there are some really good links on the Comms Collective website for giving you a breakdown of who's out there. But there's things like 7 Sharp, The Project, those slightly different, quirkier places, a spin-off, great long-form journalism. So, you know, while we always immediately think of stuff on Herald and Radio New Zealand and TV and things, there is a whole multitude of channels out there. So a bit on the where, so that will really kind of impact on who you're going to talk to. So if you've got a local story, it's actually quite good, because most of the time, especially if you're going for local print, most of those local newspapers are owned by either Stuff or NZME. So your story will appear on the New Zealand Herald website and the Stuff website at some point if you've got it into your local paper. So, you know, starting local can actually lead to much bigger coverage, which is quite good. What you can also do is you can also play the regional game. So if you are lucky enough to have case studies in a number of regions, hey, you can go for a story in each region based on your case study. And that means that you get hit after hit after hit, because journalists don't talk to each other. So they won't know that they covered that like last week, especially when it comes to the Herald and stuff just scooping up regional stories. So if you're in one region one week and then you're on the Stuff website, if you're in a different region the next week, you will still be on the Stuff website because they won't remember. So, you know, it really is worth, you know, identifying if you've got case studies and interesting local people, pitching at that local kind of aspect. Think about where the journalists need to come to cover this story as well. Now, again, this has changed a lot due to technology. You know, a lot of stuff is online now, or it's down the phone, or it's, you know, a Zoom interview, that kind of thing. So, journalists won't always come to you. I'd love to think that they would, because in my day that was what you did, which makes me feel really old. And also in the UK, you'd never put people on. The phone is the last resort for an interview on the radio. Everybody has to be in the studio, or you take your radio car out and do it on site. But there's a lot of use of the telephone in New Zealand media, which makes your lives easier because then you don't have to send people anywhere. But if you can offer people in a studio, if it's TV or radio, again, that will bump up your chance of getting coverage because being in quality is really important, or at least it should be. So, think about where your person can go for the journalist and think about where you're going to have it. If you're hosting journalists, you've got something where you're trying to get a few people. Is there an interesting place you can do this interview with an interesting backdrop if they're going to take photos? Is it somewhere easily accessible from their newsroom? Because they're probably not going to go to the far north, sadly. They are going to come from the end of the terrace to the other end of the terrace to cover your story. So, yeah, thinking about the where when you're planning this. The when, this makes a really big difference in terms of pitching the story. And there's a number of aspects about the when. So there's the when in terms of when you approach. So think about deadlines. Think about the journalist's workload. Never ring a radio station at 5 to the hour because you will not get anyone to pick up the phone because everybody's just focused on getting the bulletin out. Never ring TVNZ at 5:30 because everyone's in chaos mode, getting that everything last minute stuff ready for the 6 p.m. bulletin. So again, think about your local newspapers. Look at their advertising schedule. It will probably give you the print run. Great tip, Ali. Or give them a ring and find out when their print deadlines are so that you can make sure you're pitching in good time so it's not going to be last minute for them. Quiet periods are great. Everybody, the month of December is just spent trying to rack up the stories that can run over Christmas, New Year, and the first 2-3 weeks of January. So if you have a story that doesn't have a specific deadline, it doesn't have to go on a specific day in a specific week. And you can pitch it in, I'd say, mid to end of November, early December. And you can get a journalist to come out, do the story in December. And then it gets basically put on hold. And when they have a quiet period and they need to fill a hole, then that's it. Your story's there. And, you still get the coverage that you want. Yes, it's a quieter period. Maybe not everybody is watching the news at that time or they're reading the newspaper, but that's how you then capitalise on it. At least you've got the media coverage. So thinking about those quiet points in the media cycle and how you can use that to your advantage.
Even better packages up. I've worked with RNZ over the summer on doing series on series of stories and things like that. So you could do that, and likewise NZ Herald will do that. So have a 3 or 4 different stories that interrelate that they can basically pre-record or write and run in January. Yep, no, that's a great tip. Yep, because they still need content. The news is still running, so they still need to fill it. So again, it's that kind of content sense. Again, weekends, Sundays, really good time to get your story in if it can run on a Sunday, or if it can run on a Monday morning so that you can do interviews on a Sunday, or you can have already got the stuff done with the journalist so it can run on a Monday, because Sundays are a bit of a dead zone. Also think about what else is happening in the news. Don't schedule your thing to go out on a day when you know it's going to be a massive news day, probably not anywhere around an election period, because the journalists have only got one thing on their mind, and if it's not election and politics, they just don't care about anything else at that point. So thinking about those quiet times when you will get there.
Even things like Tuesday's post cabinet as well, there's basic kind of little things that happen regularly. So there's always the post cabinet stand up and things like that. It's just sort of the journos are just got in their diary. So you can often find out those things on the Beehive website, and there's sort of standard places that you can get that info.
So you're saying to avoid those times?
Yeah. Well, unless you want to go up against the cabinet, but yeah.
And just thinking about that when as well, in terms of how long it takes a media outlet to put a story together. So it takes a surprisingly long time to put a TV piece together. You know, they're like a minute and a half, 2 minute long, and they look like they'd take half an hour to do by how they're put together and cut, and it's, you know, all a massive rush. But, you know, that's a whole day's filming usually in multiple locations, multiple interviews, and the edit process takes a good couple of hours as well. So it is a lot of work to put a TV piece together, so actually securing TV coverage is challenging. Newspaper, again, there's less of a print deadline now because it all goes online first, but you know, you will want to give people a chance to be able to get it in their publications. Again, thinking about those deadlines. And you know, my first love, radio, I think is brilliant because you can just do it straight away. There's no, you know, you don't have to wait for things. You can just do it straight away in radio because it's just easy as just a microphone and even a phone if you're that desperate. So, yeah, just thinking about those logistics. And just really back to the why. The why should people care about your story, and the why are you doing this? Why are you seeking media coverage? Who are you seeking to really speak to in the end? And the why should people care about this story? That's a challenge. That can be down to specific journalists, so it's worth having a scout round to see who might have a particular interest in your area. You know, is there someone who's written regularly around, you know, that space? There are still some specialist journalists. There are a lot less these days, which is sad. So it's harder to get into kind of specialist journalist areas. But, you know, thinking about whether there is someone out there or an outlet out there that's more likely to care about your story. And again, a local outlet's more likely to care about a local issue or person than a national outlet. And again, that why they're interested. If you told somebody at a barbecue about your story, would they be interested? Or would they go, that's nice, I'm going to go and get another sausage? Like, you know, journalists are people at the end of the day. So what interests people will interest journalists.
So you're talking about the investigative journalists who've got more long-form journalism and
So yeah, there's far fewer of those these days, but also, you know, in the old days there was health, education, politics, social affairs, a whole raft of specialisms, environment. They still exist to some extent, and if you look on the like Stuff and Herald, they still have their little categories, but more and more journalists just are expected to cover anything and everything, and sadly that will mean they know nothing about what you do and who you are. And they may know nothing about the subject, and you may have to painstakingly take them through the subject, even if you've sent them a really well-written media release, because they've read it in like 2 seconds, thought, oh, this looks interesting, I'll give them a call. And a lot of journalists are verbalizers. They want to talk things through. They don't just read it, or they read it, they don't take it in, but they think there's something there. And so they'll want to ring you to see what the real story is, or what's really behind this, you know, press release that they've got. So, you know, they will want to talk to you about it, not just read your media release.
Sorry, I'm with the Comms Collective, which is why I'm butting in all the time. What are your thoughts? I haven't done the media specialising for a while, but what are your thoughts for these guys at the end of the press release to then do the background content? Because I'm thinking that can often be the good opportunity to do that sort of more intel stuff to give that context.
Yeah.
You know, what they would. Is that a good idea to kind of sort of say this is the background context that is often useful, even in bullet point form? Yeah, bullet point form, for sure. Don't have screeds of paragraphs because they won't read it. What works really well is a Q&A. So journalists love Q&A. So, you know, if you've just got like 3 or 4 questions like, you know, and it can be, why is this of interest, or why does this matter? And you can answer it there, again, even though you've put it into the press release. But yeah, or, you know, about us, or, you know, what do we do? Or, yeah, I would say especially a Q&A. It doesn't have to be long. I'd just limit it to, 3 or 4. But journalists they'll be drawn to that Q&A kind of thing. So like a question in bold and then the answer below. Probably you only want 1 paragraph for your answer. Keep it really short and tight. And make sure you have your contact details on the media release. A phone number. It's amazing how many media releases you can get where there's either no contact detail or it's a generic number or a website address. And at that point, you just put it in the bin because you're like, well, when people had bins, the metaphorical email trash can.
So, you're not going to bother following up. If you haven't given me easy access to you, I'm not going to do the work to find you as a journalist. So have your contact details there. Really important, have your contact details on your website. If you don't mind having them out there in some form, because again, you're just making it easy for journalists to access you. And that's part of that trawl through, when they're looking for people to comment at quick pace, who can they find? Google search, okay, I found this organisation, they look relevant, go to About Us or contact us. Is there a comms person? Great, I'll ring them. Journalists may moan about comms people, but my goodness, it makes it a lot easier to get hold of who you actually want to talk to, rather than having to go through receptions or, dig through stuff. So actually, I think we've got a huge amount to offer when it comes to making journalists' lives easier. So yeah, it's pretty basic, and there's actually some really good advice on the Comms Collective website about media release writing as well. So I won't go into this too much further here, but when you do send a media release, if you can find a specific journalist, great, but you always should send it to the generic address as well, because chances are that that specific journalist may or may not see it, but the generic email address will go to everybody in the newsroom. Or there'll be 2 or 3 people constantly monitoring that generic inbox address. And those are all on media outlet websites. Make your subject line really interesting. So your headline has to be interesting, but your subject line for the email, that needs to catch an eye and be interesting as well, because that's what they'll see first.
Can I just point out here, you'll probably cover this, is that you don't have to do a media release. So a media release can be a good way to get your head around a particular story. But the example Paula had, if you're just trying to connect with someone and say, we've got someone here who could be a good spokesperson on this issue, or, this person could make a good interview, you can actually do that without writing a media release. It's about the relationship stuff, and also that, again, and how widely you send out a media release, or whether you're writing a story and targeting one media outlet, there's another decision to make. So a media release is, I think, a really good way to sharpen your story in your head, but it's not an essential part of the process, particularly if you're just looking at targeting one media outlet or journalist.
Yeah, that's true. This is more of targeting a number as well. Paula?
I have another question on that. If you have a journalist, say for example you've made contact and you have a journalist, because stepping back, they're actually really hard to get hold of.
Yeah.
They don't have ties, their contact details and stuff. So if you get that journalist and you have a bit of a relationship with them, do you foster that relationship? Like, is it worthwhile kind of like sending them, regular emails saying this is what we've been involved in and this is what we're working on and so on, and happy to talk further? Because I sort of feel like I'm so busy in my day-to-day job, I don't have time to sit down and kind of put together a media release and get that all looking really sharp. So then the next job kind of comes in and you just kind of keep going and keep going. But I was thinking, if we're not reaching out to the media, we're not telling them what we're doing. So, but I'm like, can I just send them, hey, how's it going? This is what we've been working on lately, da da da. Is that annoying to them, or is that something that you would suggest would be a good idea?
It's probably only annoying if it's of no relevance to them. So if you're just telling them you've been to a few meetings or things, like your day-to-day kind of stuff, which I know you wouldn't be, but organisations can think what they do is really important, and the rest of the world can go, don't really care. So it's about trying to step out of your organisation, and that's what you guys do. You're the outside perspective, and it's really challenging to maintain that as a comms person, especially if you work somewhere for a long time or you're really passionate about it. But you always, one of your core skills is being able to step outside and say, okay, why would I care about this? Why would my Auntie Jean care about this? Like, what would I tell someone on the street about this? And what would I want them to go away thinking? And so you've got to really try and maintain that external perspective, no matter how much your CE goes, yeah, but everyone will be interested in this. You have to be there to say, they might if we did it this way, or they might if we had a great case study, but they're not going to be that interested in, the day-to-day workings. So I think if you've got things that are going to be of interest, and that's that thing about only go to them when you've got something.
Can I just chip into that as well? One of the things that has worked for us is because we do have particular journalists who we work with and who are interested in our organisation. We have used the embargo and given them an embargo press release and material, and they will treat that with respect because of the relationship and it damages their reputation if they break the embargo. And then that puts the story in the right place at the right time before going forward.
Yeah.
I used to look at the signs and years after that and used to send out generic things that certain kinds of some journalists who want to get an exclusive, and these are the ones that we have closely try to be like non-biased, but they just, they would be their science journalist or whatever. So you could treat that particular journalist as the exclusive and give them, this is coming out from other journalists on this day, but we're giving you an opportunity to cover those before, cover what's happening by it. That could work.
And that leads really nicely into almost one of the final slides. Don't worry, you will get to do some thinking and talking to each other in a moment. In terms of, that specific pitch, a bespoke offer. Journalists love exclusives. Stick the word exclusive on it, and that will ramp up the news interest. An exclusive, all that means is that you're just giving the story to that outlet. So that may be as an embargo, so they get a first run at it, and then you send it to other media outlets afterwards. Or it may be that you just give it to that media outlet because the chance of them covering it, if they are the only ones, is far higher. And then you can, again, capitalise on the coverage you get from that bespoke offer. So that's a really good way to build a relationship with a journalist, is to give them opportunities like exclusives. I think another thing that you can do in terms of thinking about the bespoke offer is think about your partners. Who do you work with regularly in your space, or who is another organisation that may be bigger, may have more resource, maybe more in the news, that you could piggyback off? Can you work with them? Can you be their case study? So, it's worth talking to organisations that are in the news or have bigger comms teams and say, hey, we've got this spokesperson who'd be really happy to be, you could point journalists to us. And that can be a way to get coverage. Because the larger organisation or other organisations may not always be able to have somebody to speak on something, or they may not actually want to, but you guys could be the option. So again, thinking about who you can foster relationships with, who are also kind of seeking similar media coverage to you. Right.
Sorry, can I just go back to my earlier question about actually how you found all the contact details for people?
Yeah, so I'd look on the Comms Collective website. I have a really good list of all the media outlets. Most media outlets have at least a generic email address and phone number, so you can always just phone up. Probably start with asking for an editor. No matter the channel, there will be an editor, whether that's print, online, radio, TV. That will, magazine. You'll go to the kind of decision maker then. And the editor probably won't be the person you then deal with on a day-to-day basis, but they will give you an idea of who you could talk to. So they may have a journalist who's interested in that, or...
So if it just goes to news desk, whatever, they'll fire it off.
Yeah.
I also find doing a Google search of, say, if you're looking at social housing and you want to see who's been writing about social housing, if you're doing social housing stuff, and you'll come up with journalists who have previously written on that, and it's very easy to guess email addresses or ring up stuff and ask for that journalist. So that's quite a good way of actually creating your own bespoke media list.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've kind of already covered this, really, thinking about that, how you engage on those kind of reactive moments. So thinking about that spokesperson, how you build their profile, if you've got case studies, who you can point journalists to. And we've already talked about making it really easy for journalists to find you. Right. Enough from me. Okay.